Moving on to the next group of disease organisms. I didn't have a good cartoon for it, so this just applies to a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing. I'm hoping that you're working on your papers. Remember, you can always get them pre-corrected through me. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but for some of you it will be, some of you won't be. Way easier for me to correct on a physical piece of paper and send it back to you, give it back to you, whatever the heck, however it works. So it's very difficult to correct a digital copy and then send back a digital copy. But we'll work it out. We'll figure out how to get it to work. We're moving on from the bacteria to a somewhat more limited impact on human health group. And it is these guys. Funguses, fungi, fungi. Is it, take your pick. Is it, they're all used as pronunciations for this stuff. It's an interesting group. Funguses are long strings of cells, sometimes humongous networks of cells. Some of the largest organisms in the world are funguses. I seem to remember years ago that there is a soil fungus that's basically one continuous organism that covers almost the entire non-mountain state of Colorado, the parts where there's soil. So these can be, pretty extensive, but they're still just single strands of cells, except in some cases where they bundle a bunch of them together for special structures, like a mushroom. If you've ever plucked a mushroom, unlike pulling a plant that pulls up roots, it just goes doink and it comes off, and you look and go, was it attached to anything? Well, yeah, it was attached to a whole bunch of soil hyphae, they call them. But they're, except where they were packed together in the mushroom, they're all separated out in the soil, so you don't see them when you pluck the mushroom. For us, we don't have a lot of good ecosystem for fungus. So your typical fungus that lives in us is living on or under a surface where they generally are not particularly dangerous. These are things like diaper rash and athlete's foot and jock itch. There's a type of fungus that doesn't like to live in people, but it will if you wind up inhaling the spores. And because it isn't good at it, it tends to be very dangerous, and that causes histoplasmosis. You can pick those spores up from bird droppings. If you see people cleaning buildings, like sandblasting and cleaning buildings, you'll notice they're wearing extremely expensive respirators in order to prevent taking in the fungal spores, which are microscopic, and winding up with histoplasmosis, which is very much life-threatening. But your typical fungal infection is just on or under the surface. Is that what's happening is, these fibers are kind of crawling just under the surface of your skin, and your immune system's not too crazy about it. So you get this itch, sometimes pain reaction, inflammation reaction. There is one fungus that is kind of interesting, that it kind of shows you a typical fungal pattern, where if you get a puncture wound and you get a couple of the wrong type of fungal spores in there, it will send the fibers out from that puncture wound. Now, our skin is a fairly uniform spreading medium, and it will get just so far from the entry point, and the whole rim of the circle will come up through the skin and try to release more spores. And that's what we in the United States call ringworm. Ringworm in other parts of the world is an actual worm, but here we call that type of fungus ringworm. And it is related to the other types of funguses that infect us. Funguses are mostly dangerous, not for living on us, but they can do some fairly nasty things to us. So you go out to somebody's house for dinner, and they go, have some mushrooms on your salad. I picked them myself. Well, you're gonna hesitate on that because an awful lot of mushrooms that you can pick yourself are going to kill you. And there's a number of fungal toxins that are extremely dangerous. Keep in mind, a typical mushroom is just part of a larger organism. And if you start browsing on the mushrooms, it's in that organism's interests to keep you from getting all of them. So will try to kill you pretty quickly. I'm kind of surprised there are edible mushrooms. I'm not surprised there are poisonous mushrooms. I'm surprised there are edible mushrooms. Is that there's probably some evolutionary reason why the toxins didn't really matter. Although there was an indication a number of years ago that edible mushrooms in parts of the Russian forests were developing toxins. So who knows? But there's also toxins that grow on things. They call them rusts sometimes. Is that your one handout that's going to address funguses talks about a toxin from rust that grows on rye grains, especially under cool, moist conditions. Most of the time, these things don't build up on our food products to the point where they're dangerous. There's one that grows on peanuts that can, under some circumstances, be dangerous, but your typical peanuts don't have anywhere near enough of it for it to be a problem. Rye only develops enough of it under certain conditions, and they do believe that's what happened in parts of New England in, I think, the 1600s, where this toxin that the rye that the fungus produces on rye is very, very, very similar on a molecular level to LSD. And it has some of the same effects. It can be very toxic to animals. It can cause hallucinations in people and cause other nervous system issues in people. And they do believe that in the few villages around New England that had the witch problems, that what they may have been getting on certain years where it was a certain type of growing season, they had certain types of soil, and then they stored the rye for a certain amount of time over the winter, that they may have been exposed to this pretty nasty fungal toxin that was kind of killing animals spontaneously. We're people, we like explanations, and we go, she gave it the evil eye. Bessie was fine, and then it had seizures and fell over. Somebody cursed it. And then when you start taking hallucinogens, which this also was, you're likely to see and hear things that maybe are not really there. It's an interesting theory. It's one of the only theories that really does tie a lot of the details about the Salem witch trials together, although there's a lot of competing theories on that. And you do have a handout that talks about that. But that really is all there is to talk about in terms of funguses and human health. We already talked about how they do produce antibiotics for us, so that's a good thing. But other than that, and yeasts making our dough rise and making alcohol for us, I guess that has some effect on human health, but not really.